Reflection, Chapter 28. All at once the mirrors exploded. Thousands of tiny glass shards ripped across the room, flying off in all directions. Mulan crossed her fists in front of her face, blocking her head from the oncoming storm of mirror pieces. Sharp fragments nicked her cheeks and sliced through her sleeves and pants. She tried to fight off the flying shards with her gauntlets, but there was too many of them. The glass beneath her cracked and the ceiling collapsed. She ducked and covered her head with her hands. "Stop!" she shouted. "Shang, please!" The captain lowered his hand. The storm ceased, and the soldiers drew back their weapons. Had enough? Mulan shakily rose to her feet and saw her reflection in the pieces of glass at her feet. She touched her cheek. Blood smeared her fingers. She recoiled. Had Shang really just given an order to kill her? The Shang she knew would never hurt her. "Shang," she said, her voice quivering. "I don't know what you've been told, but my deal with King Yama is for all of us. You, me, and Shishi. We have to work together and find a way out of here." "Zen told me how to get you out of here," said Shang, crossing his arms. "You fight your inner demons, Mulan, and mine is that the friend I trusted most lied to me. The only way I can vanquish that is if you take my place and die you." There was a trace of regret in his face. It softened his features for one fleeting moment, long enough to make Mulan's heart lurch. Maybe it was him. Then his expression hardened. "China needs me, Mulan, more than it needs you, so this is how it must be." He turned to the soldiers behind him, motioning for them to prepare for another attack. Mulan kicked her leg back into a lunge and raised her fists. She wasn't going down without a fight. She'd find a way out of here. For both of them. Her father appeared at Shang's side. "You should never have come back." Her mother and grandmother echoed Fa Zhou. Then the villagers and the rest of the soldiers. Mulan even saw the matchmaker among them. "You are a disgrace," the matchmaker yelled. She turned to the other villagers, her bright red lips curling into a smirk. "I knew she was trouble. How dare you show your face back here? You will never bring your family honor." As the shouts intensified, Mulan's cheeks grew hot with shame and anger. Her heart pounded and her skin tingled with sweat. This was one of her greatest fears, to go home and be reviled by her parents, their village, and her friends for bringing shame upon her family name. "I fought for you all," she wanted to yell. "What does it matter if I'm a girl? I held my own. I saved our army from the Huns." But she pursed her lips tight and reined in her anger. "This is a hallucination," Mulan told herself. "Don't listen to them. Don't lose control." She couldn't even understand what they were shouting anymore. The commotion grew so loud that all she could make out was her name. Find a way out, she reminded herself. It was hard to see where the walls were. The frames around the mirrors had disappeared, and if she hadn't known better, Mulan might have believed they were actually outside and not trapped in a chamber of mirrors. She ventured closer to the walls, but Shang obstructed her way. She tried to move past him, but he was too fast. "A life for a life," Shang said. "King Yama can't afford to let both of us leave Daiyu. Only one of us gets to go, and it isn't going to be you." "Watch me." She bolted left, running for the mountains behind the tents. She thought she saw a way out, a brightly lit path that led toward the distant moon. If she could reach it! Another wave of shards shot out of the mirrors. As soon as Mulan heard the glass whistling through the chamber, she slammed her body to the ground. The glass fragments looked sharper this time. They were thinner, too, with sharp points, and glimmered as they flew. They hurt like needles, just pricks at first, but as more and more shards bit into her flesh, the pain seared into her arms and legs. Some pierced her skin, and others cut her only just as they flew past. As glass shattered all around her, echoing in her ears, Mulan realized she had no idea how to get out of here. "In the chamber of mirrors, you only battle the demons within," Zen had warned her. Even if everything in this chamber was an illusion, the gashes in her cheeks and arms were real. The staggering pain from her battered body, that was real too. If she didn't fight back, she would die here. So she got up, shielding her face with her arm. The shards flew at her so fast that there was no time to blink. Only fight. She raised her arms and jabbed at the glass pieces. She didn't hold in her fear. Every time a fragment pierced her, Mulan let out a cry. Then she channeled that pain into anger and determination to live. She kicked and whirled, swooping her legs up to evade the flying glass pieces. Without a shield, she couldn't possibly protect herself from every angle. She wouldn't last long against the mirrors, not unless she broke them. Her tactic had been to defend herself. But that wouldn't work forever. Even when she aimed her kicks and punches back at the mirrors, more shards fired her way. She picked up a larger piece of glass and held it against herself. The shield was brittle, and it wouldn't last long. Shang watched from a corner of the chamber, arms crossed and shoulders square. "Get up, Mulan. You'll never get out of here." Teeth gritted, Mulan smashed an oncoming shard with her raised gauntlet. The impact hurt her wrists. Everywhere hurt, really. Her shoulders ached, and glass pierced her knees and legs. Only adrenaline kept her going. "I could do this all day." "You don't have all day," Shang replied. "And neither do I." He turned, heading for the lit path toward the moon, toward freedom. He was leaving without her. Mulan's chest tightened. She couldn't forget the anguish on Shang's face when Hugh Guai had taken her, when he thought she'd perish by falling into the waterfall. Shang, the real Shang, cared for her. He wouldn't betray her like this. "Wait!" Not caring about the shards anymore, Mulan ran after Shang, ignoring the blast of pain as the glass smashed against her armor. Weakly, she reached for his arm. "Wait!" All at once, the camp and the mountains and the trees vanished, blanketing the chamber with the blank darkness. The reflections of her parents, her friends, and the villagers disappeared. Only Shang remained. He stood in the middle of the moonlit path. His eyes were hard. "You don't give up, do you?" "I'm not leaving without you," said Mulan. She reached for his hand, but a gust of wind shuddered her away from the captain. No matter how she tried to make up the distance, another gust tore them apart. She blocked her face with her arm until the wind passed. When she looked up again, King Yama's soldier demons surrounded them. She recognized Lang Guai, the blue one who'd led her across the bridge of helplessness. He stood in the front next to Shang, whom his soldiers had tied to a tree. Before she could begin to fathom what was happening, Lang Guai thrust a wooden bow at her hand. "Kill Captain Li," he ordered. "Then you may leave Daiyu." The bow was knocked, and a jagged shard of glass. Its sharp point glinted in the chamber's dim light. "No," Mulan whispered, but the demon began to growl at her. "Kill him. Kill him," they chanted. "The only way you'll leave this place is if I die," said Shang. "I wouldn't hesitate if I were in your place." She lowered the bow and arrow to her side. Was it really him? Deep in her heart she knew it wasn't. The real Shang was waiting for her to pass whatever tests awaited her in the Chamber of Mirrors. But maybe that was the test, or rather the price she had paid across this chamber. If it is true that the only way of us may leave, then I will stay. Shang pressed his lips into a thin, cold line. "Even if it means you're trapped here forever?" "King Yama won't be merciful," added Lang Guai. A chill nestled in the nape of her neck, but Mulan didn't shiver. It didn't matter whether this was only a test or whether this was real. Her determination to save her friend wouldn't waver. If this was the end of her journey, so be it. "I made a promise to myself that I'd bring you home," said Mulan, stepping closer to Shang. She straightened. "If I have to break it, then—" She raised the bow, drawing the string taut. As she pointed the glass arrow at Shang, she saw the captain hold his breath. She waited a beat before releasing the arrow. She couldn't afford to miss. "Then I'll save you." Her voice cracked as she spoke. "No matter what." With a snap, the arrow tore across the chamber. During its flight, its glass shards caught all the light of the moon shining above, reflecting 1,000 colors. It was a beautiful sight, one that kept Mulan from daring to breathe before the arrow found its target, and it ripped through the rope around Shang's shoulders, setting him free. Nearly collapsing with relief, Mulan barely noticed as the bow dissolved in her hand. Everything else disappeared around her. The demons, the tree, the rope, even the glass arrow shattered at Shang's feet. Shang's blue aura shimmered, darkening so Mulan couldn't really tell whether it was the captain who spoke or someone else. "You have passed the first test," rang the low, hollow voice. "You swore you would risk your own life to save your friend, even at the face of betrayal. You kept your promise." The captain's shadow began to fade. "Now, do you know yourself? We shall see." When he was gone, Mulan let out a deep breath. A test. Her lungs nearly gave out with relief. That wasn't really Shang. It was just a test. Glass crunched under her boot. Her knees quivered, so she carefully lowered herself on the ground to gather herself. Thousands of her reflections stared back at her from the smashed glass pieces. She was bloodied and bruised. There had to be dozens of tiny shards lodged in her body, and one particularly large piece on her thigh. Mulan winced when she saw it, but she knew what she had to do. She wrapped her hands over the shard. 1, 2, 3. With one swift thrust, she pulled the mirror fragment out of her leg. Pain shot up from her temples. Gasping, she hugged herself, clenching her teeth until the shard gnawing at the leg dulled. Then she pressed on the wound to stop the bleeding. As the pain slowly passed, Mulan pushed her hair out of her eyes, then glanced behind her shoulder. Shang had said she could advance, but the chamber was empty. Was the test over? No.